All right, we're going to talk about data risks. And this one should be pretty obvious, but apparently it's not, and I don't really understand it. And it is the practice of mailing around reports and mailing around data sets. And it turns out, with the cloud and with that internet thing, you really shouldn't ever have to do this. And so there's two risks. Well, the main one I really want to talk about is just you got a data leak. Anytime you send out a report, or you send out a data set, man, that thing can go anywhere and there's no controls, and I'll give you examples of that. And then the other one is, if it turns out the report or data set is wrong, you have no way to recall it or fix it, right? So whatever bad data you put out there, if you're, we won't go there. If you're, some government agency that put out bad data, or you're a company, you just made a mistake, you really gotta, this notion of mailing out data sets is the worst. And, I was at a place where we actually, we're looking at rolling out a new reporting system that wouldn't let you print or make copies of the data. You had to send people links. And what our users told us was actually, the new system makes it hard to mail my data to my external partners. And our answer was, yeah, you're dang right it is, because you should never have been mailing those anyway. You should have come to us and asked how we could share correctly. I'm going to do the recommendations first, and then we'll walk through the scenarios. My recommendations are, the first step to recovery is to admit you have a problem, and in this case, you need to admit that you have a data problem. And that you have to create policies and train people to stop sending data as attachments, and we have to implement a system that gives them the ability to share data without mailing stuff around, right? And you have, as a group, these weren't in order apparently, you got to recognize that transmitting data without controls is an exfiltration risk. It's a risk for people to blackmail you. It's a risk of your customers having their data stolen. It's a risk of your customers being manipulated in some way that they shouldn't have been able to, but it's because you shared the data. And what we want to do is we want to make it easier to work with this system than it is to bypass the system. So we want to make people work around our system to share data by email. Right? So we have to admit that we need to share data with people, and then we need to come up with solutions. So a couple paths you can do. This actually originally started with item 5 and 6. You can get tooling, right? You can go out, you can buy a reporting system. Reporting system's got an internet portal. You could use that system to share the data with an external portal. We're a couple places where we did that. Another one is you can create a blob storage area, or one of these file data set storage areas, and you can do sharing with individuals with special credentials. And the notion is you're still sharing the data, but you could pull it back, right? The right thing to do in a lot of ways is to have really strong UI controls around this, but I'm not as convinced those work as well. But in some cases, you might not have a reporting tool or a data sharing tool that would control the data enough that the users could, the other company or the other people in your department couldn't use it for their own purposes. And so in that case, we'd do it in blob store. At least we'd have a record. And you got to create workable authorization controls, right? You got to set it up in a way that departments have access to data, that there's a way to share data sets with understanding that you've granted access, and that you have an audit thing that says, hey, you know what? My department gave the finance department access to this data, those kinds of things. The goal here is to provide a better alternative for your users. What we don't want them to do, they need to get their job done. And so they'll either work around you, or in some cases, they'll create their own shadow IT departments that basically build their own systems with no controls that then do what they want. That's always bad. I worked at a place, we had a couple thousand of those one time when we had a SOX audit. So I'm just going to go through some of the scenarios, and the first one is sending reports, right? So if I send a report to somebody, this case should be pretty obvious. If I send the report to somebody, or generate a report, and then I email it to them, it's possible I could email that to anybody, and therefore that would be a data leak. And it's possible that that person would be able to send that report to anybody else they wanted, and now I've got a major data leak. In this scenario here, I did it inside the company because that's why we have access controls, because not everybody is supposed to have access to all the data. You can have the same problem if you go to an external company, right? It's actually exactly the same problem. I sent the data to my buddy at the other company who I'm working with, and then they just forwarded it on to everybody in their company, and we know that's a problem. So this is even worse, right? You don't even have internal email anymore. At least the other way you could see it in an internal email that got forwarded around, as bad as that is. But if it goes to another company, you've lost all access. So let's look at linking. We had a user that just mails out a link. The person actually has access to the generated data set. So when they come back and they look at the link that was in the email, they actually end up in the report system or the blob store somewhere with their own credentials. And they have access. If they were to forward that email with that link off to somebody else, it doesn't do them any good because they don't have credentials. And so we protected our data. This is actually the best of all possible situations. In some cases, this won't work because they're going to machine use that data, and so they're actually going to extract it and copy it. But at least the email wouldn't be able to be forwarded, and they would actually have to explicitly bypass access policies to make that work. So you have the same thing with an external entity. Like I said, in this case, a lot of times there'll be a partner system where if you either as a data store or maybe we give them some kind of guest credentials in one of our reporting engine tenants. And so we generate a data set or a report for them, and our partner teams or customers or whatever they are have access to that portal, and they have access to that data set. But if they were to forward it on without sharing their credentials, because there's always a way around this, right? The other people inside their company wouldn't have access to data. So that's why this link one is great. People actually have to do the wrong thing. And they can do the wrong thing, right? They can actually have used their link to get access to the data, and then they would actually be able to make a copy and then forward it on. Yeah, you know what? Too bad. Not a lot we can do about that. They own the exfiltration, and at that point, they probably own the liability around that, right? You gave them access to data, and they broke the access policies and forwarded on. So that's really a problem for them. We want to be able to share with internal and external, right? Let's go back to the top here. We want to be able to share with internal and external entities data, and we want to do it in a way that we retain control over that data, or we make it difficult for somebody to violate our policies, and then we're good to go with that. And so I hope that helps. Look at your use cases and figure out. I worked at a place and we realized we were sending, hundreds of reports a week to other people, and we had no idea where that data was going. And so that's that. So leave comments. I feel like this should have been more detailed, but it should be enough, right? Don't set up a system where your users are driven to share your data in ways you have no idea what they did. And that's it. Have a great day.